Hello, everyone. I hope you're all remarkably fine and dandy. Today's topic of discussion is the lost continent of Atlantis. So, did Atlantis exist? If it did exist, in what time period and in what location? Today, I'm joined by Ryan Seven, who I first discovered on the Amish Inquisition podcast, an excellent podcast that goes out on YouTube every Sunday evening around 7 o'clock. So, without further ado, I keep saying that. Here's Ryan Seven.
Adieu.
Adieu.
Leave.
I make that mistake with every bloody video. Don't ask me why. Okay, so Ryan, I
Yes,
saw
mate.
your presentation on the Amish podcast a few weeks ago, and it was outstanding, mate. I really enjoyed it. So much so that obviously I've asked you on today for a conversation about the subject. So, how did you originally get into Atlantis and other esoteric subjects?
I am not into Atlantis, weirdly. I mean, I
Right.
think everybody's into Atlantis, but I wouldn't say it's particularly a subject that I gravitated towards. I just happened to be researching something else. I was making a tarot deck at the time,
All right.
and I had an intuition that the Sun card in that had some relation to Atlantis. So then I just went and read Plato's Atlantis in Timaeus, and it's as bad as adieu, Timaeus, and just because of the training that I've given myself in other areas of this stuff, I was able to read it a little bit differently than I think other people have approached it. So, and I said to Phil at the Amish Inquisition that I should come down and have a chat about that. So I did. So
Brilliant.
yeah, I don't claim to be any expert or know anything any more than anybody else, apart from a bit of a slightly different reading on some of the names and the way people look at Atlantis. I think that's the different angle I brought to it. So
Oh,
yeah, it
brilliant.
was more of a different angle.
Brilliant. Okay. So where shall we start the this adventure then, mate? Shall we start with Plato?
We'll
What's
start
your
with Plato.
what's your take on what Plato wrote? What was the book that he wrote that
So
information in?
yeah, it's called Timaeus,
Timaeus, that's the
and yes, and there's two interesting things about it. Obviously, one is the fact that it's the first rendering of the Atlantis myth that we have.
hmm
But he says that it comes from Solon, his teacher's teacher, or his teacher,
Yeah.
and that the original story goes back 9,000 years,
hmm
which would take from that time would take you to Randall Carlson's much beloved Younger Dryas period,
Yeah.
i.e., the end of the last ice age. So
hmm
lots of things go together there, seen as the claiming that it's a civilization, a high civilization, long gone.
And also Göbekli Tepe as well, and Karahan Tepe. They
Around that time.
were constructed around that sort of time period as well, weren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the way that the information is put across, I call it the secret science. But all this esoteric knowledge is put across as if there were people that had left some kind of horrible disaster, and there were kind of priest men sent out, and they rock up on different people's shores and teach them.
Okay.
You see in Sumeria and places like that, they've got like fish skins, and they call them the Apkallu priests, as if they come from the water. But one of the problems with all this is that you've got an esoteric tradition bound up in it all. I find the same with the Bible as well.
hmm
Some of that may well be historical fact, but it's been manipulated so that that character Jesus fills the role of a sun god, for example, or certainly an astrotheological god.
Mm.
He's going through all the different stations. So this was the way things were done in the past. And I do believe that Plato's Atlantis is a compendium of a lot of this esoteric information put into a story,
Mm.
possibly with real roots. And I think that's really the important thing in Atlantis, not necessarily the possible civilization that went. That would be more interesting,
Okay.
but less provable. What is provable is that a lot of the names mean things that he's put in there. That Atlantis's configuration itself has meaning to it.
Mm-hmm.
There are layers and layers.
Mm.
I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I definitely have some very interesting quirks.
Okay, so where are you placing it geographically, Atlantis? Are you placing it off the west tip of Cuba, Bermuda area, or do you give any credence to the Eye of Sahara?
So, I mean, the Eye of Sahara is interesting, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah, massively.
Especially as it's near the Atlas Mountains, but that name came later. But is that name only recorded later?
Mm-hmm.
And colloquially, it was called that for a long time. It's just difficult to find out because we're talking about the deep, deep past.
Yeah.
This is the
definitely.
thing. I don't actually place Atlantis on the Earth, but if I was to place anywhere, it would probably be the Azores or somewhere like that. Though the Eye of Sahara, the Sahara, is very interesting.
Okay, okay. Have you looked into the psychic Edgar Casey much with regards to this
I
subject?
have, yeah.
Yeah.
I
What
can't
do
really
you?
remember what he said about Atlantis, but I do remember a good few years ago having a look at it.
He,
Do you
he
remember what he said?
Well, he predicted the discovery of the Bimini Road 3 decades before it was discovered. I think he predicted it in the mid 1930s, and then it turned up in 1968.
Yeah.
And evidently, it's in very shallow water as well. It's only about 15 foot deep, the water where it is, so it's quite easy to find. But yeah, he made I think he did something like 900 readings on Atlantis, so he was very, very interested in this subject.
Wow.
So
And the fact that he's doing, if everything is true that was said about him and what he was doing, one of the big esoteric secrets, and one of the things that does seem to be hidden in this Atlantis tale, is what he was doing, entering that zone of that almost yogic no mind state, and drawing down. People might say drawing down from the stars, or just drawing down this information. It's the same stuff as the black sun. You hear about the black sun, and in Greece it was like the Ionic realm. And yes, it all seems to point to that kind of information eventually. There are several layers to it.
yeah, definitely. Okay. There's something he talked about that I've picked up on very recently. I'll show you the image that I've got for it. This is the two-eye stone. And so it turns out that this two-eye stone was basically the foundation of this lost technology that the Atlanteans had. And this was where they were basically getting all their power from. So I don't know if you've heard of that at all, the two-eye stone.
How did this chap who found it relate it to Atlantis?
Yeah, it was, I think so, yeah. I'm not sure where it is now, but Edgar Casey said in one of his readings that the two-eye stone was where they managed to garner all their power from. And they had flying vehicles that they were able to fly because of this stone. And it also was connected to the destruction of Atlantis because there were basically two groups in Atlantis. They were the Emilius group, which were kind of like the good guys, and the Belial group, which sounds a bit like Baal, who were the bad guys. And the bad guys got hold of this technology and set it at a too high a level, and basically it brought everything down. And that's how the whole thing kind of ended up, if you like.
So what's the actual history of this tablet that we're looking at?
I don't think there's too, other than what Edgar Casey wrote about, and I've not read all the readings yet, so very little basically. But this is supposedly the foundation of that lost technology, is the two eyes.
If that is anything like real, it immediately suggests to me swastika stuff, which is all pole star, which is the pole's like a still point, and everything, the heavens move around it.
Yeah.
Well, that's an analogy for you going into meditation like Edgar Casey was, and settling on that still point in the center where the heavens move around. And by getting to that still point, which is these meditative states, you can literally draw down energy from that place. They use it in Qigong, as I was saying on the last episode I did for Amish Inquisition. It's basically the power source for magicians.
Wow.
Now, whether or not people are actually drawing down from, it's described as a black sun. So you got the normal sun, which you can see is physical. Then there's what's called the sun behind the sun. This is in Mithraism and all kinds of ancient mystery traditions.
Right.
But you connect to that black sun, this Saturnian sun, this stillness, basically, transcendental meditation. And that is a timeless place where you can draw down the past, the present, and future from, which is what Casey was doing. Or just draw the energy down from this black sun. All it means is, it sounds scary, but it just means that it's a hidden sun, it's a secret sun. It's almost the sun that powers the sun. What they're saying is the origination point of all energy.
Right. I was going to say, by the way, if you can hear any background noise, that's one of my 4 cats running around like a maniac. Apologies for that. What you're talking about there sounds like what it reminded me of the Akashic Records. Is there a link to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, these are coming from different cultures, but yes, that would be up there. To Plato, if we're going to talk about Plato, it's this realm of ideas. So the best way of talking about it would be just to take it back to the beginning. In the Greek tradition, obviously Plato's a Greek fella. In the Greek tradition, it was a mixture of chaos and inevitability that brings about the beginning of the universe. That you put chaos into so many different forms, and then eventually that inevitability part, the universe is created. And now that for them happened through a character called Phanes, who is kind of like the first ruminations of consciousness from the universe, which then kind of is looking for love. So it decides to love itself. And by doing that, by wanting to love itself, it splits off into 2 halves. Those 2 halves then become the masculine, and this is like the life force. Phanes is the life force. He's born in an egg with a snake around it. And that life force then divides off into masculine and feminine. Right. So you get the beginning of time, the end of time. You've got 2 things basically, which the universe can happen between. You know, in China they call it yin and yang. It might be positive and negative nodes of electricity. It's the life force essentially divided, masculine, feminine is the way they said it. So at this point of division, all possibilities of the universe are kind of formed. So you get this realm of ideas, which in other Greek traditions is the Ionic realm, which is out here in the mortal world. That word's important. Mortal. In the mortal realm, we are subject to time. We're subject to all the things that happen in time, fate. To get beyond those things, to go back up to that realm where we've all come from, this realm of ideals, which seems very much described by Plato. Manly P. Hall says about Plato that it's much like Kabbalah. It's understanding the first thing and how it divides and becomes the many things. Right. So this is what I'm describing to you now. So you can go back to this. Ion is a god of. So Saturn's a god in time, and then Ion, which is a step before him, is all time at once. If you get me?
Yeah.
So here there's a beginning and an end. There's not. It's all the same thing. So that's where Casey's going to. That's where, magicians go to gain the power.
Okay, now that reminds me of something else, actually. What you just said there is fascinating. So I'm going to show you this guy. This guy is called Thomas Townsend Brown. He was a very, very high up scientist in the 20th century in America. He was heavily involved in the Philadelphia experiment, if you know about that.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to have invented a device called the acoustic fan device. And he spent a lot of time, just for some context, he spent a lot of time in Western Cuba and San Antonio, Cuba, I think. Anyway, he was there a lot. apparently studying the white sand in Cuba, but he had a fascination with Atlantis. Anyway, at some point he came up with this acoustic fan device, and the story goes that if you stood in front of this device, you were supposed to see your entire life from beginning to the end. And he demonstrated this device at the, I think it's called the RAND Corporation, which is like within the military in America.
Yeah, I know,
So
right.
it's all documented. So what you were talking about there, I saw that correlation. So there's some very, very interesting things that have been going on in trying to locate Atlantis, particularly off the western tip of Cuba. As recently as you all know, I'm sure you know about Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein. They were heavily involved in this research. In the last year or so, leading up to her arrest, Ghislaine Maxwell was in a submarine called Atlantis.
Called Atlantis.
Yeah. And she was going through the seas off the western tip of Cuba. I've got to be careful what I say here. But basically, you had Epstein Island, which is famous for some very nasty, horrible things. But that was kind of like in the background, if you like. What was really going on that island was Atlantis research. They were trying to basically locate Atlantis, and it looks as though they've done it. There was also a lady. Sorry, mate. Once I get going, there was also a Russian scientist called Paulina Zalitsky, I think her name was, and she was hired by the Cuban government, Castro, in the very, very, I think, going back at least 30 or 40 years ago now. Anyway, she photographed and has video footage of all these ruins on the seabed off the western tip of Cuba, and what we're looking at now is one of them. And you can clearly see their pyramids. It looks basically like some sort of city. It's just mad stuff going on with this. People like John Lennon and Ernest Hemingway were buying lots in the Atlantic Ocean because they believed that land was rising. And that's a very difficult thing to explain scientifically. But sometimes when things sink into the ocean, it's not like a complete fall. Sometimes they rise slightly again before they fall more, blah, 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 blah. And so they believed that land was rising and that Atlantis would be kind of discovered as it would appear above the ocean level, if you like. But she took lots of photographs. And this particular photograph was in the National Geographic magazine before they very, very quickly covered it up and silenced it. So I believe there you are looking at a remnant of Atlantis.
I mean, that's amazing. How old is this? How old is this image?
Sorry, mate.
How old is it? The image.
Now I should have looked into that. I think she left Cuba around 2001. So I think we're probably talking about either the 80s or the 90s. But
that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a genuine photograph. And this guy as well. Do you recognize this guy at all?
No, I don't know.
He's a novelist, Ernest Hemingway.
All right. Sorry, Ernest. Obviously, I know who he is.
So it turns out as well, a lot of this research, by the way, is not my own research. It goes down to the Dark Journalist on YouTube, and he's made an amazing video called Hacking Atlantis in the Hot Zone. If you get a chance to watch it, it's absolutely brilliant, and I'll link it beneath this video. So anyway, so Hemingway was very famous for hanging around in Cuba. I think he spent decades living in Bimini and in parts of Cuba. And he was very famous for his fishing. He loved to fish. Well, it turns out, thanks to a declassified document, that he had lots of very high-tech scientific equipment on his fishing boat. And what he was actually doing was he was trying to find remnants or lost ruins of Atlantis. And it's believed that he found a lot of stuff. So much so that when he died in 1961, President Kennedy at the time that went on a mission with the military to go into Cuba and recover all of his lost artifacts and research on it, which they managed to get out of Cuba on a shrimp boat, which is pretty cool. So there were so many famous people and very, very interesting characters over the last 60 or 70 years that have kind of centered around this area off the west tip of Cuba. And obviously we have Zelitsky's photograph that survived. There was supposed to be a lot more footage than just this photo. Having said that, I mean, so there's definitely something going on with Cuba and Atlantis. I don't know if you've ever come across this book before. I'll come off that. Andrew Collins wrote this book. It might be reversed, called
Atlantis
Caribbean.
in the Caribbean.
That's
no, not really.
Highly recommended, mate. That's very, very good book, worth reading. But there was another guy called a famous author called Conwyn Beaumont, who was around in the early to mid 20th century. His niece was a famous novelist called Daphne du Maurier. Don't know if you've heard that name, but she wrote Rebecca, I think. She wrote famous books. Anyway, so he was a Daily Mail journalist, but he ended up, after he retired, he wrote a lot of stuff on esoteric subjects. One book he wrote, which I haven't read yet, because it's really hard to find, is on Atlantis. And he places Atlantis in Britain, but in particular in the northern part of Britain, so northern Scotland. And I recently discovered myself that there is supposed to be a major ley line that connects northern Britain to Cuba and the West Indies. So I think that's very interesting as well. So
the area I live in is all the towns called, like, Leyland is the next town over. Exton, Croston, they've all got these ley line little secrets in there if you're listening closely. Definitely. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so
for me, Atlantis, I mean, yes, possibly on the Earth, and obviously where you said southern Cuba, some people put it in Hyperborea, which is like Scotland up north from there.
Yeah.
They themselves just say outside the pillars, west of the Pillars of Hercules, Heracles, you would have said, not Hercules. Mm-hmm. But there are other clues here, and you already put up that image of the circle with the eyes around it. I forgot what it was called. And I said it looked swastika-like, which is, yeah, there you go, which is the plough spinning around the North Pole. You know, when you see those pretty pictures where people have done long exposures of the northern sky, you can see everything spins around the central point.
Yeah.
There you go. And that central point's the pole star, which was this ancient, like really old gods, like way before any writing was down. They were all pole gods rather than sun gods or moon gods, it seems. Saturn to the Greeks and the Romans, Kronos to the Greeks, same character. He's like depicted as being an old deposed god. He's Zeus's father, he's Jupiter's father, who's had his bits chopped off by Jupiter. And his sickle that he has the bits chopped off with is made of stone. So it's showing you like old Stone Age tools, really, really old ideas that are being passed down. And I think one of the reasons why they were put a layer back, not only in time, but in the genealogy of the gods, is that they want to keep it a bit secret. Whenever you look into Christianity or Judaism or any of these Abrahamic faiths, you tend to find Saturn at the back of it. Yeah. So it's as if the religions themselves are pretending to worship Zeus or Jupiter or Jehovah, whatever you want to call it. But really, it's the Saturn at the back of it. In the Bible, it was El, the Elohim and words like that. Yeah, they're the Saturn words. They're the Saturn gods. Whereas Jehovah's obviously Jupiterian volcano.
Okay. God. So are you saying that the Elohim came from Saturn?
Well, the word El is the word for Saturn. Or Ohim is kind of like a plural for gods and goddesses. It's like a bisexual reference to many, like many people of various genders. So Elohim literally just means the gods and goddesses. It means the planets. Saturn's the top guy, and then Jupiter, Venus, Mars, all the rest of them. So the pillars of Heracles, the pillars of Hercules, are the two. There are two poles. There's the pole to the North Pole, which the Earth spins around, and then there's the planets going around in a separate angle, and that's got its own pole. And these two pillars, Atlas, Atlantis, that is named after Atlas. Well, Atlas holds up the skies. We see him on maps holding up the world, but he was really holding up the skies. So if you take the two pillars of Heracles, which are to do with Atlas, holding up the skies, then look up, and Atlantis is several rings. It's like a central pole with a mountain in the middle, and then a ring of water, another ring of land, another ring of water, another ring of land, and off to the sea.
Yeah.
Well, you've got waters up there. Those are called the waters. Where the rain comes from. There's the waters below, and there's the fresh waters above. Bitter waters below, which is salty. Fresh water above. So I just looked up because I saw all the signs weren't pointing me to the Atlantic, they're pointing me upwards. So that's where I looked. And I must say, the first thing I've actually brought up Plato's Atlantis here, and what I want to say is that I want to reiterate what I said before, which was these things, these old tales, are meant as mnemonic devices, so you can remember genealogies. Those genealogies of people will represent various stages of emanations of the universe or of consciousness. So, both those things are the same. So we already talked about this Fanny's character, then splitting off into male and female and making the many things. Well, it says here, and Plato starts it off, but in addition to the gods whom you have mentioned, because these things are usually done in conversation, so we speak to somebody else, I would specifically invoke, it's difficult to read this, mnemosine, as in memory, excuse me, itchy nose, mnemosine, which is like a mnemonic, a memory, a meme, a mimetic device. So he's saying the first god he's conjuring to talk about Atlantis is memory, and then he goes on to talk about all the other stuff.
Wow.
So you can look at other names in there. There's, I can't call them all to mind right now, and it doesn't really matter. There are certain names attached to the certain places in Atlantis. The Queen of Atlantis, who lives in this mountain in the center, which is again a pole reference, and also the reference of his spine. There's something called the Holy Mountain in lots of religions, Mount Meru, or the Invisible Mountain in alchemy. And that it's your body, and it's your spine.
Is that the Kundalini? Yeah. Is that the Kundalini?
A lot of these things go back to the Kundalini stuff. That Kundalini serpent is the same as Fanny's that we just talked about. Fanny's is represented by an egg with a serpent around the outside. That serpent's a dual creature, and it symbolizes the life force.
Right.
So why is it a dual creature? Well, it looks phallic, doesn't it? A snake.
Yeah.
As soon as it opens its mouth, that's a vagina. I mean, almost exactly a vagina, teeth included.
Yeah.
Yeah. So also you got to think, from serpents in the past, all these serpent cults, they were taking a lot of their antidotes and a lot of their drugs from snakes, often passed through people's bodies or through horses and cows, etc., to get antidotes. But that serpent is suggesting altered states of consciousness. When you get bit by a snake, one of the things is that you go crazy. You enter a different state of mind depending on how much you've had. People still do cobra venom in India now. It's still a thing.
Really?
When they ran out of drugs in Pakistan recently, they all started smoking scorpion stingers. Whatever's in these venoms is neurotoxins.
Yeah.
We've got neurochemistry, so
I
in
wonder
the
what
right doses.
smoking a bit of scorpion.
Say that again.
I wonder what that's like, smoking a bit of scorpion.
I'll sort you out, mate.
Yeah, that'd be a good night, an interesting night in. definitely. Okay,
No
blimey.
chance. I like doing risky things, but that sounds too far for me. So what I wanted to say was, there's the lady who founds Atlantis, the queen of it, the matriarch. She Poseidon falls in love with her, and this is so you got the sea. But Poseidon wasn't just a god of the sea; he was kind of a sky god. He was pretty much Jupiter of an older cast. I think that's why he said Poseidon instead of Jupiter being the main god, because Poseidon's actually older.
Mhm.
And then Poseidon and Jupiter kind of split apart, and Jupiter stayed god of the waters above, and Poseidon god of the waters below. Again, it's this. There's always a duality going on.
Mhm.
So what happens then? Well, her offspring, the first of which is Atlas, which means 10 in Pythag. So Pythagoras came before Plato. Pythagoras, for anybody out there, means son of the serpent.
He was
And he
Plato's
was,
teacher, wasn't
yes,
he? Yeah.
and he was the founder of this order, which were clearly doing yoga like stuff. They're clearly doing a lot of stuff we call Kabbalah these days. He's doing a lot of stuff with sound and a lot of stuff with mathematics as well. These guys saw maths as the basis of the universe, as we do now.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has a system. Kabbalah with the tree of life, I don't know if people are aware of it, is essentially a series of spheres that looks a bit like a Christmas tree, a bit like the human body.
Mm-hmm.
And all the baubles on the tree are different stations of materialism. That is based on something Pythagoras invented called the tetractys, which is essentially just a pyramid made of one dot at the top, then two dots, then three dots, then four dots. And these are these emanations. Well, the top dot is called Atlas, which means number 10. Pythagoras considered 10 to be this perfect number. Also, Atlas. So we'll get into there's this idea again of emanations from this singular out and out and out, like this original god Phanes, who split off into male and female in time and things like that. So he's reiterating this stuff. And when you look at the names that are being used by Plato for these 10 people that rule over Atlantis, remember the tetractys has 10 spheres inside it. The tree of life has 10, essentially 10 spheres inside it. That all these names mean something, and they all seem to be getting at drugs, shamanism, orgy, these ancient Greek mystery rites, essentially. And also, when you do the isopsophy, which is, if you've heard of gematria or anything like that, you essentially take
Number
Greek
system.
letters, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you take Greek letters or Hebrew letters, you exchange them for numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and you find out what these words add up to. Well, all those words add up to ultra harmonic Pythagorean numbers, which are famous numbers like 432, 216, 108, 72. You'll find them all over religions, but they come from the interaction of these two poles of Heracles that I was talking about. As they roll around each other, they generate these numbers. So again, I've got more and more reason to not look down here, even if there is an Atlantis down here and it's based on some truth. I can't go out and find it. Can you afford a submarine?
No, and I think a lot of the area I was talking about earlier off Cuba is now you can't get anywhere near it. It's the military's all over it now. So
Yeah,
yeah,
looking for stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
well,
go on.
I was just going to say, and so there's my case that you can look down here, but Plato was a mystic as much as he was a lawmaker and a philosopher. In fact, philosopher really means to hold two snakes. The lover, Philo, and then you got Sophia. Sophia means wisdom in Greek.
Mm-hmm.
But when you break down Sophia, it's a snaky S, and then Ophia means snake. And when you look at Sophia, she's
I didn't
holding
know
two
that.
serpents, which are this yin and yang, and also a dose and an antidote to that dose, i.e., snake venom, drugs, things like that. that'll get you in these Edgar Casey places.
Wow, that's some info there, blimey. So, from what I understood, and that's what you've said, has put a whole new spin on everything for me. But as I understood it, King Atlas was the first king of Atlantis, and he had 10 sons.
So he's one of 9 sons. So is it? I can't remember his mum's name, but his mum and what did Poseidon get together? There are 10 children from that, like these 10 emanations of this Pythagorean
Yeah.
Atlantis. And they follow, and actually you can get 2 numbers from each name. When you add them all together, you can get 1 number out of it. But if you take the letters as they are these Pythagorean harmonic numbers. But the numbers that you get out of these characters are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 9. And 10 obviously for Atlas, which means 10. The word itself, Pythagoras used to mean the word 10. So, and I will also say, we've said Atlas holding up the heavens like you've seen in maps and things like that. Well, your Atlas is the last bone in your neck that holds up your head, the heavens, heaved up.
Wow.
The head.
Okay.
HEA, it's all up there.
Yeah.
Well, there are, we could go to the fact that the world kind of started thereafter. There was supposedly a war between the then current people of Athens in Greece, obviously not formed into Greeks yet, but whoever lived there had risen up against some marauders that came. You were speaking about them from the Casey perspective, but they were basically this great navy that was raised in Atlantis. That was what they were. When we say high technology, people do think flying craft and all these other things, but I think it's more reasonable to expect an advanced maritime situation going on where they've got fleets, they're good at trading, and they eventually get big enough and good enough at metallurgy, which is one of the things they're famed for in Timaeus, and they go on war with everybody. So, but then this gets esoteric too, because it said that while the soldiers of Atlantis were swallowed up by the sea, that the soldiers of Athens were swallowed up by the earth. Now, when you start getting elements involved, fire, water, air, and earth, it's telling you other things. Fire is the willpower and the energy that you have. Air is your intellect. Water is the mind and the emotions and things like that. And earth is your body. So when he's saying that one guy's are swallowed up bodily and other guys are swallowed up in the mind kind of thing, if one's water and one's earth. So there are just so many clues that he's not just talking about. If it is physical, he's not just talking about that. In fact, predominantly, he's not talking about that. He's talking about.
Sure, there's often many layers to these stories, isn't there? Always. I mean, on the subject of flying vehicles, you've got, of course, the Vimanas from the Indian culture that talk about flying vehicles with no real sort of. They just come out of nowhere and start talking about it. You've got lots of maps as well, haven't you? That look as though they've been drawn by somebody who's been able to see the Earth from high, very, very high up. And some of these maps go back to BCE. And you've got the Nazca lines as well, haven't you? So you've got the Nazca lines, which I think they're in Peru, aren't they? And they're these huge drawn on the ground animals, monkeys and various other animals that can only really be appreciated from high up. So I've always fancied the idea of flying vehicles myself. But
there's no reason why not, but there's certainly nothing in Timaeus or anything else, the actual, Casey aside, from the actual time, pre-Blavatsky or anybody else talking about it, that says flying machines or anything like that. It's literally, they're good at metallurgy, they're good at trading and sailing and building.
Yeah, I think Blavatsky mentioned lost technology. I'm pretty sure she did. but I think you're probably right on everything else there, definitely.
Yeah. Again, for me, because it wasn't an interest to begin with. I mean, everybody's interested in Atlantis. It's cool, but I'm not like somebody like yourself that's, you know, keen on it. For me, it was, I'm able to read these things because of the studies that I've done, and when I did read it, I was able to. It was, these things leapt out at me. So I just
where
wanted
is
to, because it seems nobody else has ever talked about this stuff,
no.
and I bring mathematical proof of it as well.
Yeah. So where are the places that you studied to sort of gain this information, this knowledge?
What I did was I closed my eyes, went, oh, what if Atlantis is in the sky? And well, I'll tell you something else about Atlantis being in the sky as well. So we said we got this central mountain, and then it's on a little island, and then you got a ring of water, and then another island, and then a ring of water, another island. Well, the sky's like that. If you look up at the pole, which is that mountain in the center, and then there are a few stars. There's a few stars around it, but then a pretty much blank part of the sky.
Yeah.
And you got the circumpolar stars, and then another blank part of the sky, and then you got the stars of the zodiac. So that would suggest to me.
Wow, this is very interesting. So in other words, they may have been kind of mapping out the stars as above, so below, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing which I came up with while I was on the Amish Inquisition was that Atlantis said it tips off and go in the sea. Well, if you look at the zodiac, the Earth itself is tipped off to one side. So when we look at it, it looks like that. So one side's always tipping into the sea.
Right. Okay. Mad.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it does. Great. Okay, Ryan. I know you've got to go soon, and I've got to have some grub. So thanks for coming on with me today. This has been absolutely outstanding, even better than I thought it would be. So I'm very grateful to you, mate. Love to have you on again at some point in the future to talk about many other esoteric subjects.
Yeah.
Cheers. So please like the video, everyone. If you're new around here, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you soon for another video. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, sir.